The following program was produced or sponsored by a community member. The views and opinions expressed are the sole responsibility of the producer and do not reflect the views of Malden Access Television, the City of Malden, or your cable provider. MATV welcomes your comments. You can phone us at 781-321-6400 or email us at access@matv.org.
Hi everybody. Hi, good evening. My name is Raven. I'm moderating tonight. Welcome to Steampunk. If this is not where you thought you were going, then you may want to realize that now.
Answers that question.
Do we panelists want to introduce themselves?
Ladies first.
I'm not a lady. Nightwing is no lady. Hi, I'm Nightwing Whitehead. I'm a costumer. I will costume in anything. Bubble wrap, fabric, I don't care. I didn't wear my steampunk outfits because I figured I would just like let everyone outshine tonight. Steampunk is, steampunk. What can I tell you?
Those of us in the back can't hear.
I don't project. I'm Nightwing Whitehead. I'm a costumer. I kind of know a little bit about steampunk and a lot of other things as well, as do all of the other experts on the panel. So.
I'm Barbara Pugliese, and I'm one of the directors of the Commonwealth Vintage Dancers, so I've done a lot of historical costuming, historical dance, and steampunk is just too much fun to let it go by. So I decided to jump on the steampunk bandwagon.
Hi, I'm Raven Stern. As I mentioned before, I'm the moderator. I really like steampunk. I started attending historical dances and things and discovered it. I think it's a lot of fun and it's a good way to use my historical pieces so that they get seen more often. And it gives me a chance to do other periods that I might not do, like 18th century, which is what I'm sporting today, kinda.
My name is DiGacomo. I am not a costumer. However, I know stuff. So that's why I'm here.
Keeping up the secrets.
Somewhat.
And my name is Stormwolf, and well, not technically a costumer. After over 30 years in the SCA, I think I class as an amateur one. I'm also a builder and a maker and a creator of things. Got into steampunk actually kind of through building miniatures for various Victorian science fiction war games.
Anybody have any pressing comment they want to start with?
Well,
What is steampunk?
Well, steampunk was invented as a term by an author named K.W. Jeter in 1979 in a letter to Locus magazine. He was describing the works that he, Tim Powers, and James Blaylock had been doing. And he described it in, of course, contradiction to cyberpunk, as essentially Victorian science fiction, but with a bit more of an edge. So it's not something that's cropped up recently. It's actually been around for a very long time. Even longer if you consider the original steampunk, which was in those days just called fiction. Your Jules Verne, your H.G. Wells, and so forth.
Okay.
What are some things that people think are really important to steampunk, like colors or particular objects or things that they use when they're doing steampunk or anything?
Yeah.
Goggles are an obvious one.
Let's go for that. That's one of the archetypal bits of steampunk, along with, let's see, what I'm starting to refer to as the cult peacemaker of the steampunk era, the Nerf Maverick. You may laugh, but I've seen about 1,000 incarnations of this beast. Mine has yet to be modified, but think of Nerf this way: New England repeating firearms of Hartford, Connecticut.
I like it.
Could you hold that up so everyone can see?
Yes, this baby. This is one that has not been painted or modified anyway. This is the standard repeating Nerf. Yeah, basically. And it's basically becoming almost as ubiquitous in steampunk as the original Colt Peacemaker was to the actual West.
Well, I'd like to introduce a steampunk classification system. If you're trying to decide how you want to dress to be steampunk, I've noticed that there are some basic tendencies that you'll find. Now, my daughter suggested that the world is sort of divided into mad science and wild adventure. So, if you lean towards the lab coats and the Erlenmeyer flasks, then you go with mad science. And if you like your pith helmets, then you might go for wild adventure. So, we've got two flavors. And then, once you've picked, you decide what kind of a person you are. And we suggest aristocrat, pirate, mechanic, urchin. I'm sure there are other, categories that you can pick. But if you decide that you are a scientific aristocrat, you'll dress rather finely. You might wear a monocle. You would either underwrite scientific experiments, or you don your own lab coat and get in there and do your stuff. Pirates might be either more airship pirate types or more land pirate types, depending on whether they've gone for science and technology or whether they're just going for the gusto of adventure. You might decide that you are a mechanic or a soldier, someone who's in the trenches, and again, you might decide whether you are more scientific or more adventurous. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I like it.
I'd have to disagree, because steampunk as a fashion style, as opposed to literary genre or musical style for that matter, is a fairly wide spectrum. Mm-hmm. On the one end, you've got essentially neo-Victorians, and these are the people who care about things like, period fabrics, authenticity. They want to express the Victorian aesthetic in a pure form. Then it drifts into the, shall we say, more Baroque aspects, which is where the goggles show up, and then it kind of goes way off, and that's when you start seeing people with steam-powered arms, like brute force leather sales upstairs. So, while I think you've covered the middle range pretty well, I think there's still room at the edges for different kinds of costumes.
Well, I think that's what steampunk is all about, the edges.
In a way, yes.
Because if you want to be Victorian, then you would go very Victorian. But if you want to be steampunk, you'd start by going to Salvation Army.
Well, you could actually argue that you have to ask yourself the question, do you want to be steam or punk? There's a writer named Jess Nevins. He, among other things, does all the annotations for Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And in the steampunk anthology called Steampunk, he wrote the introduction, and he suggested that there were basically two generations of steampunk fiction. The first generation was basically cyberpunk with steam. That's where things like the Difference Engine with Gibson and Sterling did. And that tends to be a lot more gritty, a lot more political. And because of the nature of the universe, it tends to also be a bit more authentic. You don't get a lot of the wild technology because you're trying to duplicate the Victorian society plus a couple of other things. Then you had the second generation steampunk. And that's, I think the best example for that is Phil Foley's Girl Genius. Yay. Where the punk is pretty much completely gone. While there is a certain undertone of rebellion, it's not quite the society must fall aspects that you'd get from a cyberpunk derivative. So from that aspect, that's where the airship pirates and the mad scientists fit in. So once you've decided which of those camps you fall into, or indeed whether you fall into either of those two camps, that's when you can. That's the seed you can start from and say, okay, do I want to be a Victorian with all the baggage that the Victorian era had, or I just want to have fun with it? And both are perfectly valid positions. Now, I know some of the neo-Victorians, which developed independently of steampunk, get a little bit annoyed when the hardcore steampunk with the goggles and the big brass arms and the fancier aesthetic sort of crashed the party. The concept is very similar to when I say authenticity Nazi. So, well, that's not period.
Oh,
no,
yeah.
but it's fun.
Yeah, but we have an advantage over the authenticity Nazis. We've got the guns.
Point taken.
I have to say that the neo-Victorians I've seen are not Victorian. They're neo.
I had a rather nice chat with a young lady at another convention where she basically laid out that position. She was a neo-Victorian and was wondering where all these weird things were coming from and why were they ruining her fandom. Which, it's a big tent. There's room for everybody.
Yeah. I think the other thing is you get both sides of that, because the reason I like steampunk so much is that you can take the neo-Victorian aspect of it, and then there's the freedom to bend it and do whatever you want. So I think that a lot of people who are more neo-Victorian may like that, because it's a break from what you normally do. It's sort of like taking a vacation, and you get to go do something else with it, which I think can be fun.
I did have another young lady actually at the same convention suggest that the reason steampunk became so popular as a fashion statement was because goths wanted to wear pretty clothing that wasn't quite as depressing.
That's an interesting concept.
Considering what she was wearing, I'm pretty sure she believed it.
Okay, I'll take your
That
word.
whole death thing is just a weenie subculture anyway.
Steampunk is when goths discover brown.
I would actually say when goths discover shiny.
I could also add, you talk airship pirate, but there's also something else to all. There's sort of the airship pirate's antithesis. The various, the Royal Naval Airship Service, the U.S. Army Airship Corps, people who hunt pirates. Because after all, they are the most dangerous prey.
I'm still waiting for steampunk ninjas.
Give it time.
You just said the word, you know.
Actually, no, I've said it for a while. I actually think it was last year here where I came up with the theory that the difference between steampunk and cyberpunk is the difference between ninjas and pirates. Think about it for a second.
Okay.
Cyberpunk. Black leather, fancy weaponry, usually a Japanese influence thanks to William Gibson. Kind of dangerous. Steampunk. Romantic. Flashy. Fun. Pirates.
I was going to say, black leather, fancy weaponry.
I mean, all black
Okay.
leather.
Okay. Not
the comic
in
Pirates
a place
versus
like
Ninjas,
this.
haven't you?
True. But
There are no ninjas with beards.
well, how can you tell behind the masks?
Just doesn't work.
Have you ever seen one?
Well, no, now they're good.
Clearly, only the really good ninjas have beards.
So in terms of steampunk costuming, besides goggles, really awesome weaponry, what types of periods do you think go really well with steampunk? If you're going for a more neo-Victorian aspect, what other things, like from the other extreme, do you like to pull into steampunk? Like, let's say you're going to a steampunk event. What do you wear?
In my case, you're looking at it. Basic, and the scary part is none of this is really costuming. Everything here is something you can find at pretty much any store. Levi's have been, or these denim jeans have been around since the gold rush. The Henley t-shirt hasn't changed much in 150 years. The leather vest has been a leather vest since, probably Rome.
A little later.
Yeah, but everything here, pretty much with the exception of the hat, which is,
Vaguely Confederate Army, but not
no
quite.
other side. I have ancestors
Oh, sorry,
that would
blue.
that would Yeah, I have ancestors that would come out of the grave if I wore Jeff Davis gray.
It's tired. I'm tired. I saw the hat and said, "Hey, Civil War." Okay.
Yeah.
Confederate.
Well,
Union, flip a coin. Okay.
They pretty more wore that up till they started wearing khaki.
Well, it's interesting because for guys, anyway, your choices are a little bit more limited. A lot of waistcoats or leather vests is close enough. A lot of top coats, a lot of top hats, a couple of bowlers, goggles,
I think I could carry off what she's wearing.
pocket watches.
It's not that hard.
But personally, there's still a lot of flexibility. I mean, there's the standard, English aristocrat look or European aristocrat. There's the Wild West, which is a whole branch in and of itself. Not the Wild West, although the TV show was actually pretty steampunk. There was no movie. There was no movie. And I was actually at a panel at another convention where they said, there's a whole other branch of period garb that could be used. Turkish, Indian, not American Indian, but subcontinent Indian, Chinese, of course, because the Orientalism was a very popular aesthetic in the Victorian times. A lot of people who were in the army and sort of picked up on various, shall we say, found artifacts, so occasionally by killing their owners, but...
Well, just think of all the pictures of Victorian men wearing tarbushes and fezzes.
Yes. In fact, there's a kind of hat, it's not a fez, but it's similar. It's soft, it still has the tassel on it. I don't know.
Tarbush.
Okay, that is a tarbush. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so if you wanted to go period with it, there's actually quite a lot of flexibility, but it's still relatively straightforward. Women, you guys got most of the fun stuff.
What do you think?
Well, what I like about steampunk is the idea that at any moment you might go off on an adventure. You wear comfortable clothes, things that you can move in, short skirts. That's kind of nice after you've been swanning around in ankle-length skirts for many, many years. But what you take from the Victorian era is the fact that clothes are very constructed. And so I like having lots of constructed touches in a steampunk outfit, like a hoop skirt or a bustle, fabric that's been ruched up, or it's very hard to be a woman in steampunk without a corset, right?
Other than it's very hard to be a guy in steampunk with a corset.
I've seen it done.
You get to take your
Not
choice
impossible,
on
just very hard.
corsets,
Actually, I saw some Civil War.
whether you want to display them on the outside or wear them on
True.
the inside. And so I have to say, my corset's on the inside. I'm just wearing a vest. But other women wear corsets on the outside, or a zone, which is a corset-like garment. So the bones of the corset, the posture, the construction of, lots of frou-frou stuff, and yet the ability to run away from your enemies, or run towards your enemies with a blaster in hand, is also there.
Did you want to add anything? Okay. Yeah. I really like 1860s and hoop skirt look for steampunk because I see a lot of bustle era stuff, and I like going for what people aren't doing yet. But I'm actually at school in New York, and they have these really great events called the Dances of Vice, if anybody knows those. And I went to one recently actually with Barbara, and there was a lot of 18th century, and it was very inspiring because it was really cool. So I've sort of started playing with that, and I like the idea of taking sort of Marie Antoinette's court and things and mixing that in with steampunk. There's a Doctor Who episode, if anyone's familiar with it, with
The Girl in the Fireplace.
Yeah,
That was a sad one.
that's great. So the TARDIS in the court is a really cool concept, and the idea of taking technology and bringing it back a little further is something I really like.
Talking about steampunk, Doctor Who, very steampunk.
At times. Sometimes it's been more steampunk than others. The movie, at least in terms of the set design, was very steampunk. There was a movie, I know.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And most of the movie is actually quite forgettable, but that console design was pure steampunk.
Saw a couple hands in the audience. Maybe start with you.
What do you think is the prototypical steampunk novel? The one that started it all.
You mean what do you mean by started it all? I guess.
Well, you mentioned the ones in 1979. That's when the phrase occurred. When do you think the one that started the Goths switching over.
I don't think it was a
20,000
novel.
Leagues Under the Sea, if you're talking about the starting one.
Yeah.
I think he means contemporary novel,
Yeah.
and I don't think it was a novel. Actually, I've discussed with a lot of people, and there are a couple of candidates. One is League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, both the comic and the movie, at different times. Some have argued that it was due to the Wild Wild West, which doesn't exist. I like to think it was Girl Genius.
Yeah, that's a beautifully.
Simply because Girl Genius is bigger than it ever has any right to be for a small press comic. I mean, it won the Hugo last year for Best Graphic Presentation. Deservedly, but considering it was up against some pretty heavy hitters. So I think it was that. I also think that the influence of bands like Abney Park and Voltaire had something to do with it. And I think in a way it was partially due to Goths just saying, there are other colors other than black. So I really can't point to a specific novel and say this did it. I mean, the Difference Engine came out in the 80s. Steampunk didn't really hit it big until about
maybe 7 years ago. And even then it was pretty
borderline. It's accelerated since then.
We had a historical ball here at ARISIA, as we do every year. And about 6 years ago, the theme was steampunk. And very many people just didn't know what to do with it then. And then we tried it again last year, and it was a huge success with hundreds of people showing up, all dressed up. And so the modern movement of people dressing and doing steampunk is fairly recent, I would agree.
Philip Reeves also has some great books. Larklight, it's more of a young adult novel, but it's really excellent in terms of steampunk lit. Did you have a question back there? Sorry, I had earlier.
Yeah, you were talking about what time period for steampunk, and I think the animated movie Treasure Planet was kind of like pirates and steampunk, from the golden age of pirates. And that, to me, that movie was very steampunk. It took the story of Treasure Island and put it in space.
True. On the other hand, I don't think anyone would say, "Ooh, there's Treasure Island. I want to dress like that." I mean, it was a great movie for what it tried to do, but it's not really. It's not big enough to be, I think, the cultural impetus. Any more than the Fantastic Adventures of Jules Verne, which was on TV a couple of years back.
So you think it was just a general evolution from one thing to the next then?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of snuck up on people, and all of it was on the fringe for many years. There have been steampunk. There was a comic series called Steampunk. Joe Casey did it. It was Joe Kelly. I always get those two confused. But it was kind of cartoonish. What people call anime style when they don't know what anime style is.
Yeah.
And of course, there have been works like Alan Moore's From Hell or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which aren't exactly steampunk, but are Victorian, and that was another chunk of it. So it's hard to say. I actually went looking for a project I was working on, and I couldn't find it. So
there've been some articles showing up in mainstream media noticing steampunk, but also just a Victorian influence coming into fashion and showing up on some of the runways, and maybe there's kind of an overall cultural readiness to, maybe we're starting to look back somehow.
Embrace elegance.
Embrace elegance, men wearing pants that fit. And,
Not easy to do.
Or also, some people think that the theory of sort of rejecting mass production. That in steampunk things are handmade, they're handcrafted, they're.
I think that's your department.
Or if at least individual to you, no one else is gonna go to the store and come back with the same outfit you've got on. And that leather and brass and gears and steam, and these are all things that are made, not produced and shipped to us from China.
I would say definitely, especially in England, a lot of it has to do with the do-it-yourself movement, where as opposed to going to Home Depot and buying the same bits and pieces that everybody else has, making your own, or taking the bits and pieces of Home Depot and modifying them to the point where it no longer resembles the original item. One of the things I've seen a lot of is wooden cases being made for people's laptops and netbooks.
There's a fellow named Datamancer who's basically made a career out of it.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of, actually.
If anyone's seen Warehouse 13, Datamancer made Archie's keyboard.
Yeah.
As well as a couple other widgets, I believe. Unfortunately, the show itself didn't quite deserve it.
Yeah.
One of the places that I've seen this sort of new Victorian aesthetic is in the New York Times. Someone in the style section knows some young people.
Bound to happen eventually.
Well, yes, these particular young people, I mean under 30, have been going to antique shows and buying things with mahogany and brass, taxidermy, interesting gadgets that are Victorian, and they've decorated their apartments that way. And so if you read the New York Times style section, it sounds like it's a real movement.
Right.
I'm not sure how many people are doing it, but then I say, oh Lord, that's what we used to do 20 years ago. My husband and I had a house that looked like these are portrayed. But what is wonderful about steampunk that these New York people haven't caught on to is the creating it yourself. They're collectors, and steampunk tends to lean towards the makers. And I think that's a wonderful thing about the steampunk movement. On the other hand, one of the things that really advanced steampunk for many people was you could have a pocket watch. You can keep your watch in your pocket and take it out and everyone will be impressed. So that's sort of a throwback to the Victorian collectors.
One aspect of steampunk that still remains somewhat punk is the focus on the individual, as you said. I mean, there's the costuming branch of it, which is very, creative, and there's a lot of work with fabrics and stitching and so forth that I know absolutely nothing about. But there's also people like Jeff Mock or Datamancer who take something that's mass-produced and essentially disposable and make it not only functional but a work of art. And it's that aspect of it that seems to be the most important for some people. The fact that you can take something and make it unique, something that no one else has, something that you can treasure forever, or at least have forever, even if it stops working after 3 years. But it'll still look like nothing else on the planet. The artistry, the engraving, wood carving, all sorts of electroplating. I actually saw someone make a computer mouse involving what used to be a real mouse.
Oh.
Yeah.
Actually, it was fairly interesting. So it was just a skeleton. And
Okay.
but
Figure out how you can fit a computer mouse inside a real mouse.
other way around, actually.
Oh, okay.
But you have that whole creative urge. I'm going to take this. I'm going to make it my own. I'm not just going to settle for the same telephone that everyone. I mean, okay. I've got this. Probably a good chunk of you have something similar. If not an iPhone, something that looks a lot like one from Nokia or one of the other manufacturers. And it's very handy. I've gotten to the point where I can't really function without it. But it's still kind of generic. You look at if I take this out of the case, I just put it in the case to keep it from getting scratched, and I leave it on the table. Someone could pick that up and they wouldn't be able to say, oh, this belongs to Mario. You create something. You infuse it with your own personality. Someone will look at it and say, oh, wow, who made that? I want to find out. There's a guy, I don't know his name, unfortunately, he posted with a handle, who made a steampunk lightsaber. Just the handle. Nothing, no blade functionality. Absolutely beautiful. And he did it. Not for a costume.
Just to do it.
Just because he thought it was cool. And it turned out to be really cool.
You can't open that up and tinker with it.
I could, but I probably wouldn't do very well. I'm not a maker. That's his department.
Yeah.
Hi, I've got a question for, especially for our two costumers on the ends and working with English alike. If you were advising somebody who really wanted to dive in and get going on persona or costume, what would be the cheat you would recommend for getting a hook in or coming up with a key piece of costuming? Do you have a favorite cheat
Okay.
to get you going?
I got one. Waistcoat.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible not to look steampunk if you're wearing a waistcoat. Not a vest, it has to be a waistcoat, but it works pretty well because that's pretty much the only steampunky thing I own. And you'll see the outfit later in the convention, and it works pretty well.
It's even more steampunk if you pronounce it whisket.
I'm Italian. You're lucky I don't pronounce it Vestalia.
What else?
Goggles,
Yeah.
Goggles are good.
pocket watch, vest. I sort of like the vest and shirt sleeves look because it looks like you're ready for anything.
That will
In
go for
true
either
Victorian
gender.
period, a gentleman would not be seen in his shirt, which was considered more like an item of underwear, unless he were really working. Working men would wear a vest and a shirt. Upperclassmen would wear a shirt and a vest and a coat.
They were really scared.
Even a working man won't be seen without his hat. The coat comes off first.
In fact, she just described my costume.
And that's something else you could add. Some form of appropriate hat.
Yes.
If you look good in hats. I don't look good in hats.
Let's see, boots. For women, striped stockings are hard to beat. They're really cute.
The boots have to be the, not the zipper, the
Buckles.
buckles.
Lace-ups or
Yeah,
buttons.
buttons.
Or
There's
just,
a lot of button boots.
Actually, I think the
out.
zipper was invented in period.
or just plain pull-on.
I'm not entirely sure where, but I think it was like 1870 something.
Yeah. For a man, you can get away with the standard riding boot type or pull-on work boot.
And of course, there's the whole Old West thing. So you just go to your favorite, Texas fashion store and pick up, nice duster, maybe some blue jeans, and you're pretty much covered.
James West always wore that tight vest with the short coat.
Yeah.
That would
Wouldn't work on me.
You could still hit, of course.
Right.
Incredible tailoring there.
As a fairly new customer / slightly new to steampunk thing, go spelunking in your closet for anything brown / leather. Make a big pile and then start sorting through it. That's what I do before every event. I have a couple friends who in the back over there who can attest to the giant pile of clothes that were on my floor before I got here. And then you just start picking from it. You say, okay, this brown works with this brown, and then these boots go with this, and eventually you have an outfit. And accessories help pull it into steampunk as opposed to just like really cool clothes. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can do a lot with the right accessories. A pocket watch does wonders.
I happen to like a leather belt and lots of things hanging off the belt,
That works too, although sometimes simply wonder, are you an electrician? You gotta pick the right things.
Yes.
You'd be a steampunk electrician.
True.
Saw your hand a while ago.
Sort of Tesla punk, I think they call it.
Girl Genius has come up a number of times, rightly so. I was wondering what other kinds of source material do you use to try to find the look you like?
In my case, bunch of the Osprey books on, let's see, the one on the Indian Wars, Army of the Republic. I went all the way up to the Spanish-American War, but I look better in blue than I do in khaki.
There's a lot of forums if you want to trade ideas with other people.
Brass Goggles is pretty big. There's also a Mass Steam.
Mass_Steam for the locals.
And there's also Steam_Fashion, I believe.
Steampunk Empire as well.
I think it's just Steam Fashion on LJ.
Okay, thank you.
Steam Fashion.
It's also a velvet mechanism.
They're out there. I mean, Google is your friend in this case.
Yeah.
There are also several websites that discuss the history aspects of it. Of course, if you're interested in ideas, all you have to do is, English fashions of the late 19th century, early 20th century, because you can pretty much push it all the way to World War I before it starts losing the steam aspect of it.
Clothing catalogs from that era.
Yeah.
Google Steampunk Star Wars. You'll find some fun stuff.
Oh yeah, there's some. What was the name of that website? I had it written down, but yeah, just Google up steampunk and you'll find it. There's actually some dealers who force leather upstairs. There's another place called Steampunk Emporium, well, they're a little pricey, and a lot of other dealers have started saying, the steampunk thing might actually be worthwhile. So if you're really looking for that one piece to start your look with, you might be able to buy it instead of find it, and then just build off of that. A good waistcoat, or
The Lady in the Leopard bookshop.
or of course, or if you're into that, of course, it will also give you a starting point to work from.
Another good one would be a place called Cumberland General Store. It's not steampunk. Actually, what it is, it's a supply place for people who like to live off the grid. And it's got all sorts of interesting, they're modern creations like modern hurricane lanterns and kerosene lanterns, a certain amount of men's haberdashery, all sorts of plates and cups, and you could stock your entire house, and some people do from it.
What's that called?
Cumberland General Store.
I'm gonna look that one up
Also,
myself.
You can find their catalog like at Barnes & Noble in the periodical section.
Also, Jake Von Slat, the Steampunk Workshop.
Oh, yeah.
More stuff than clothing, but
How about I leave out
he's got a
Jake?
great aesthetic. He did a mod of an old school bus that he bought, and he turned it into a Victorian RV. It is so cool. I recommend you go look it up. He brought it. He's local. He brought it to the Groton Library for an event one time and let everybody who came go through it. It's really cool. There are pictures of it online. So just if you're trying to get an idea of what is steampunk in terms of an aesthetic, if you're putting together an outfit, if you're planning an event, check him out. It's pretty
We've
cool.
got some people over here.
Yeah.
Questions?
Steampunk
Go ahead.
Workshop.
Go you and then you. You first.
Yes. So I have a question about like y'all's opinions on the aesthetic of steampunk. You specifically mentioned finding brown things in your closet. Somebody earlier made the old joke of steampunk was when the gods discovered brown. But I was wondering, aesthetically, like with colors, what do y'all feel like? Because I think a lot of people get stuck in the mindset of steampunk is about neutral colors, and I was wondering, y'all's opinions on bringing something more bright and fun into it. If you feel like that goes against the aesthetic, or if that can be.
Well, part of the problem is that steampunk grew out of Victoriana, and the Victorians were not exactly a flamboyant people.
I
In public.
Dyes, I rest my case.
Yes.
Okay. Victorian men were flamboyant.
Giant bold plaids, all kinds of stuff from the 1860s on.
bright green dyes with cyanide in them that could kill you.
I wouldn't necessarily go for that much authenticity.
If you look at busy inventing aniline dyes during the entire period from about 1840 to 1880. And there was a truly massive glut of new colors that were bright and unseen in nature and completely new.
Well, then I'd have to say that the issue is probably not what Victorians were, with the popular conception of Victorians, which is the pearl gray waistcoats and the corsets, and the women with the high collars and the bustles, and no skin exposed whatsoever. So
You don't expose the skin, you cover it in bright
Well, it
colors.
depends on the time of day how much skin you
of course, but the popular conception of it, of course, leads to the popular conception of steampunk. So. Because people get their image of Victorian fashions from a certain direction, they don't think about the loud check patterns or the aniline dyes.
Or the bodices so low that
you get arrested.
Yeah.
Well, let me say, I run a Victorian dance company, so I know a lot about ball gowns. I have been to museums, I have a personal collection of clothing. I know that they had some wild colors in the Victorian era. A lot of it you can sort of put down to the lighting that was available, and if you were in a ballroom, which was lit by candles or later by oil lamps, only once you get gas and electricity do the colors start getting muted. With the lower lighting in mid-19th century ballrooms, it really made sense for bright colored silks, light colors, pastels, but also things that you could describe as day glow orange or wild candy cane stripes. They do all show up, but it's true. I think of steampunk as less a ballroom activity. No, it's a ballroom activity. We're doing steampunk dancing, but a little less of a ballroom activity and more of a daytime traveling clothes activity. So I think that's one of the reasons that the colors aren't so bright.
I saw you over here. Did you want
I
to
just wanted to, you were talking about the aspect of making and how important that is. And for those who are looking for Victorian fashion that you can make yourself, Dover offers all period pattern books from Sears Roebuck, from all over the place of any kind of Victorian fashion you can think of. It's like for less than $25, and you get like hundreds of patterns available to you through Dover.
Patterns. not drawings, patterns?
Actual patterns, dressmaker patterns.
Past Patterns is another good one too that I like, but I've never heard of Dover, so I'm gonna take that home.
Well, while we're on the topic of patterns, for anyone who wants to make Victorian women's clothes, truly Victorian, they're very accurate and very, very user-friendly. I learned how to sew with them, so. And I'm kind of an idiot with things, so if I can figure it out, you probably can.
I was wondering if maybe people think of Victorian era as muted colors because the photographs we have are sepia and black and white.
Well, that's part of it. And as I said, part of it is the, cultural window that people see. People don't see Victorian fashions in museums that often, but they do see things like, unfortunately, Mary Poppins, which everyone seems relatively muted, even when they're dancing and singing. It's still relatively tame, except for that one scene with the striped jacket and the boater hats.
That one had cartoons in it.
Yes.
Two things. As to reference material, I work in a library system, and I've come across a title, The Illustrated London News, circa 1870 through 1910. I glanced through it once. A lot of advertisements, a lot of drawings, not only for costumes, not only for clothing. They didn't consider them costumes back then, but for machinery, everything. So it's the Illustrated London News. It's one of those benefits of working in the library system. Also, all the talk about clockwork in the Doctor Who episode made me think of the clockwork musicians that Dr. Fives used. That's sort of stretching it a bit, isn't it? But he could sort of be called, because he was sort of later in the Edwardian.
He's either 1930s for the second one or 1960s for the original movie.
Yeah.
And plus, there's a lot of variation. I mean, steampunk, when you get down to it, is supposed to be Victorian or Edwardian.
Yeah.
You might be able to push it back a century or so.
I disagree.
but there's also clockpunk, sandalpunk, ironpunk, bronzepunk, stonepunk, dieselpunk, atomipunk, finpunk.
Fill in the blank.
Yeah, but that's tomorrow's panel. So look it up in the schedule and then come by because I'm moderating. So more people, yay! So steampunk is not the end of the process. There's a lot of room for exploration. If you're interested more in clockwork automata, you can drift back all the way to the Renaissance if you like. If you're more interested in, shall we say, a more Indiana Jones 1930s thing, you got your diesel punk. So don't feel limited by, is it Victorian? A lot of people will be pretty flexible about it. So, well, no, not really, but hey, that's really cool.
It really is an emerging genre, isn't it?
All right, there and then there. Go ahead.
Continuing with the question of colors and why brown, how do you guys feel about metal with fabric? I mean, is brown the color of choice because it looks so good with brass?
Or bronze. Could be.
I think so.
I mean, steel. When people see steel pieces, they still have a tendency to flash back to cyberpunk, which you got black leather, chrome, and not a whole lot else. So as a backlash, people went more for the brass and the glass and the, shall we say, more romantic metals. And you're right, browns, reds, purples, greens go well with a brass color than they would with steel color. So could very well be some truth with that.
Yeah. What's interesting is people haven't really done anything with what was the wonder metal of 1870, aluminum.
Yeah, probably because aluminum looks too much like chrome.
Could be, but think about aluminum was the miracle metal when they discovered how to make it in the 1870s. I mean, Napoleon III had an entire dinner service made out of aluminum because it was new. Up till then, aluminum was created by a process that was more like alchemy than metalsmithing. That's why the tip of the Washington Monument's a piece of aluminum. It was the most expensive metal at the time.
Oh, the gold always.
No, actually aluminum was more expensive then.
Gold's still up there.
Yeah.
It was sort of the titanium of its time.
Yeah. And then they came up with the electrochemical process. Aluminum suddenly became something that you could produce in bulk.
Well, if you look at Victorian jewelry, which I collect, there are some aluminum pieces. There are also some really amazingly fine cast iron pieces of jewelry.
Have you ever seen any of the stuff they were producing in Russia, the Tula diamonds, which was cut and polished steel?
Cool.
Yes, and I've seen cut steel often, yes.
Over here at the end.
So once you have managed to dress yourself up in a steampunk style, is it sort of the thing where you show it off at conventions or the occasional steampunk ball? Or are you aware, is there really like a community of people who are devoted to steampunk? Or like something like the SCA or even like role-playing groups? Is there really a community of steampunk enthusiasts, or does it really truly mean like a fashion aesthetic?
I think there is a community, and they find themselves online often. But we have occasionally gone out to the Charles River Museum of Industry to look at gears and machinery, and it's very enjoyable. And some people dress up for that.
Yeah, Mass Steam is a pretty thriving community. They have meetups every month or so.
I live in Connecticut.
Yeah, but these people live. Many of them live in Massachusetts, so it's an example. And there are organized groups, not quite to the scale of the SCA, which has been around since the late '60s. So they've had a chance to build the infrastructure. But there are groups that pretend to be, an entire airship crew, for example, which I believe are actually here this year, although they may not be here yet. And so, there are small scale groups that have sort of grown together, but I don't think there's an overall, society that exists yet. There may very well become one.
I rather hope there won't be. It's kind of fun that steampunk has got a bit of anarchy going for it. I think it's nice that some groups of people get together and put a project together, something that they can show off to their friends, but I would really hate for it to become a hierarchical society.
Although the Victorians themselves were fairly hierarchical. Thank you for that word.
That's where the punk comes in.
Yeah, essentially, yes. That's why you very, very rarely see people being, I'm stock clerk number 3 in a bank. Although there are people who, who actually, like you said, go for the urchin look. I'm dirt poor. Hi. But you get a lot of aristocrats because of that.
You're just getting started and you're like kind of having to draw upon what you've already seen before. How do you avoid being a copycat?
I never cared. If you're concerned about that, just the heck with it. Coincidence, deal with it.
Start with things you already have. You already had them. You're not copying someone. I mean, if you don't go out and buy something like if you went out and saw an outfit that you really liked and you went out and bought the exact same outfit, then that would be copying them intentionally. But if you already own it and you're just putting it together in a way that you were inspired by the people that you've already seen, you're not really copying them.
Plus, let's be fair here. When we were doing a costume for a guy, while I stand corrected on the kind of fabrics and colors you can use, when you get down to it, there aren't really that many outfits a guy can wear. After all, they're all waistcoats and top coats or morning coats. You don't see guys wearing low-cut bodices. Well, usually there are a few, but on the average, if you're doing an outfit for a guy, especially, it's going to look a lot alike anyway. So I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah, accessories makes
it all comes down to the toys.
Basically, yeah.
I have another aesthetics costuming related question. So I know that when I approach a steampunk costume, even though I haven't done many, the way that I usually approach it is I start with the period correct, like undergarments and tailoring methods, but then stylize it, add the accessories, and I was wondering if that's like a common thing, and kind of where the line between period costume and steampunk costume exists.
Once you start adding the toys, it becomes steampunk.
Well, I start with a good sense of what Victorian costume is. What sort of clothing was worn for what sort of occasion, what fabrics it was made out of. And then steampunk gives me the freedom to substitute in other fabrics, or, ooh, look at those buttons. I've got to put those buttons in a row down this skirt. So yeah.
Yeah, playing with it, I think, is when you start getting into steampunk in the back.
You brought up jewelry, and when I look for steampunk jewelry online, it just seems like they put watch gears on it, and then it's steampunk. Is there any place you could recommend that has anything more interesting?
The guy upstairs who does the metal skull, you've seen it.
That's brute force leather. Yeah, they do some interesting pieces, but it's not exactly jewelry.
Also, look around. I found a bunch of stuff. You can't really see it because of the beard, but I found these at the Big E last year. They are a bunch of, let's see, a miniature spyglass, compass. I've got a magnifying glass, a little hourglass, and they're all, well, it works.
I thought that was a bullet casing, actually.
No, that's in the other.
Which also kind of works, really, sort of.
And they're wonderful. They're brass. I found them at the Big E. I've still got the address up in my room, so I can get it for you. Yeah, it was from the Vermont building at the Big E.
So
and this man also sells wonderful miniature harmonicas on necklaces.
So that's sort of a chatelaine for men.
Yeah.
A chatelaine is a collection of sewing tools. Sometimes they get very ornate. They're made out of, fine materials. And so the idea of having all of your little gadgets and doodads.
And if you don't want to wear them around your neck like Stormwolf, watch fobs were very popular in those days. So you could put all sorts of things on a watch chain and get away with it.
I'm really into smelling salts bottles. I think they're really pretty. There's a lot of really interesting designs for them. I had one on a chain I was going to wear tonight, and I just realized I forgot to put it on when I was on my way out the door. But I think that anything that's sort of like this one is actually an antique, but you could do anything that's sort of period and use it in a different way.
And something you could also point out to yours, snuff box or snuff bottle.
Especially
Quizzing glasses.
Cameos are very Victorian.
But you will have to hunt through the jewelry, because there is a lot of glued gear to it to call it steampunk stuff out there, and at some point, you just have to keep looking until you find something like.
I think you might be shocked by the things you'd find if you went into Urban Outfitters, a totally mainstream store where I have seen little brass telescopes on chains as necklaces, where I have seen little spyglasses on chains as necklaces, where I have seen all sorts of historical influences and cool shiny things. It's shocking.
They had a faux bustle skirt a few years ago in this like blue and brown striped fabric. It was really interesting.
The strangest things show up in normal stores.
Yeah, it's true.
Thrift stores. Thrift stores.
Awesome. Okay.
Theatrical costuming
time
if you
for
have the
like
money.
a couple more questions. If there's any pressing comments or questions people want to ask, we're getting short on time. Okay. I have one. Panelists, what are some other things that we haven't mentioned yet involving steampunk that you think are fun? Bands that you like? I know we talked a little bit about Avenue Park. Events that you like to go to? Are there any balls coming up? Any place you could go and wear steampunk, or like things that are related to steampunk that are not costuming? Steampunk World's Fair. You want to talk about that?
In May in New Jersey, there's a Steampunk World's Fair, which is basically an all steampunk convention. Closest one I know of on the East Coast.
Also, Wicked Fair, for that matter, also in New Jersey, and that's in February.
And I think Maker's Fair is in
Down in
California.
Rhode Island in February. It's a gaming TempleCon?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a gaming convention, but steampunk themed.
Yeah, that's 5th of, well, I'm going on the 5th, but it's that weekend of the 5th.
And if you want to do some things in this neighborhood, let's see. The first one up, I think, is next weekend. Michael Bergman is sponsoring a steampunk-themed tea dance. So you can wear your outfits and flirt with other similarly costumed people. You could even do a little dancing. Don't be afraid of it. We're going to have a steampunk-themed ball in February, and that's in Harvard Square. I forgot, Michael Bergman's is in Porter Square. So these are all things in this neighborhood. And there's a charming museum, the Charles River Museum of Industry. So it's over in Waltham. It's got watchmaking machinery, gears. It's got an old fire engine. It's really sweet. And we're putting together a steampunk mini convention there on April 10th. So January 24th in Porter Square, February 27th in Harvard Square, April 10th over in Waltham, all in the neighborhood.
And as I mentioned earlier, Mass Steam does get together fairly often. They've met at the museum. They actually had a get together at a park during the summertime, just hanging out.
Yes.
So they're out there. I mean, and let's be honest here. If you haven't gone too overboard with the brass and the shiny bits, weird shopping. Attract some attention. Why not?
It's mass_steam on LiveJournal, or I think it's under New England Steampunks on Facebook.
Yeah, they're putting together a regular website, but I don't know how far they got.
I don't think so. Not much.
Yes, wear them shopping. Wear your clothes shopping, wear your goggles to the restaurant. I've been spreading
Don't drive
the
with them,
word.
though. It doesn't work.
I've been spreading the word among my friends, and one of my rather ordinary reenactor friends was in a restaurant, and he looked over and there was a guy with a tweed vest and goggles, and he said, "I believe that young man is an aficionado of the steampunk clothing style."
I mentioned that Jake Von Slatt had been at the Groton Public Library a couple of years ago. Because steampunk has such literary influence and connection, I think a lot of libraries are really interested in getting involved. So plan an event. Libraries are great places to start. My library this summer in Westford had a like steampunk themed afternoon for kids. I'm not sure how well it did. I wasn't there, but I saw it advertised. So good places to check out. All right. Last question.
A comment. Another costuming tip. I don't remember the exact website, but if you Google Threadbangers, they have a lot of tutorials, and many of them are steampunk related, and they're very user friendly, and their videos, you can see how they do it if anyone wants to get into making clothing.
Their goggle tutorial is a hoot. It's really cute. Silly, but cute.
They have a good one for spats too. It's very easy. Easier than they say it is.
Right. So I think we've run out of time, but thanks everybody for coming. And if you have any last questions, we'll be up here.
I do have one comment I want everyone to keep in mind. Steampunk is supposed to be fun. Cory Doctorow, when he was at PyCon 2 years ago, mentioned something that a friend of his had told him that I think everyone who's a steampunk fan should keep in heart. And that's hate the factory, love the machine. Just think about that one. That's all I ask.